NIST refused to seriously consider the most likely hypothesis of explosive-controlled demolition, even though the National Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigation, NFPA 921, requires such investigation given the overwhelming evidence, including high-order damage and blast pressure front effects, which we've documented. NIST neglected to test for explosives, thermite, or nanothermite residue, and still refused to today, even when having been confronted with the peer-reviewed papers documenting evidence of nanothermite found in the World Trade Center dust by scientists, the billions of previously molten iron microspheres found in the World Trade Center dust by officials, the hundreds of witnesses hearing sounds of explosions, seeing flashes of light hurled up at the onset of destruction, the heavy steel framing hurled up to 600 feet laterally at 70 to 80 miles an hour, the high-speed ejections of the building solids 20 to 40 stories below the crush zone, unnatural symmetrical debris distribution, mid-air pulverization of 90,000 tons of concrete and metal decking, the missing stacks of 110 floors in the debris piles, and the participation of their own leaders, NIST's own leaders, in the development of nanothermite itself. And NIST implicitly condoned the illegal destruction of 99% of the World Trade Center structural steel framing evidence before the early investigations were even complete, implicit due to their non-whistleblowing of that illegal act. In short, NIST's official technical explanation of the tower's collapse is inconsistent with the evidence and the basic laws of physics, and may be deliberately fraudulent. Since it is difficult to imagine how so many qualified engineers could make so many mistakes, by contrast, the hypothesis of explosive-controlled demolition is consistent with all of the available evidence and the laws of physics. Under the prescription of the scientific method, we have no choice but to abandon the official account provided by NIST and to insist on a new investigation.
Thanks a lot. We're doing all right here. We'll see you guys soon.
Friends, I can tell you that while our two debaters are very, very well prepared, they are, for the most part, speaking extemporaneously. What do we say?
Thanks, you guys. Thanks.
Part 2 of this audio presentation, 9/11 Debate, Collapse by Fire or Explosive Controlled Demolition, featuring Chris Mohr and Richard Gage, now focuses on the third building to fall on September 11th, World Trade Center 7.
Welcome back, everybody. We are now going on to our second portion of today's debate, where we will deal exclusively with the collapse of the third tower in New York that day. Came down at 5:20 in the afternoon, and that was Building 7. Let's welcome back our two debaters. First, Mr. Chris Mohr. And Mr. Richard Gage, AIA.
Okay, ready to go.
I am now going to read a prepared statement that was jointly crafted by our two debaters, or they both had input in any case. And it will be to introduce the topic of this segment, Building 7. Here are 5 minutes of facts that our debaters agree on and want to share with you about the collapse of Building 7. World Trade Center Building 7 was a 47-story skyscraper about a football field in length away from the North Tower. There are both differences and similarities between Building 7 and the Twin Towers. Here are some of the differences. No plane hit Building 7. The Twin Towers suffered structural damage from plane crashes. Building 7 suffered non-significant, quote, non-significant structural damage from the debris that fell from the towers. The Twin Towers suffered an explosive collapse. Building 7's collapse was implosive. The fires in the Twin Towers had single sources when the planes crashed into the buildings. The fires in Building 7 had separate sources on separate floors. In November 2008, the National Institute of Standards and Technology issued its final report on Building 7. The report states, quote, "The collapse of World Trade Center 7 is the first known instance of a tall building brought down primarily by uncontrolled fires. The Twin Towers burned for under 2 hours each before collapsing. Building 7 got hit with burning debris at 10:28 a.m. and collapsed at 5:30 p.m. and according to NIST, burned for almost 7 hours. Now we will paraphrase the NIST report so we know what they claim. NIST explained that column 79 helped support the east penthouse of the building. Building 7 had a large open atrium in the lobby and was held up by columns and 3 complex truss systems. Here's a photo of column 79 and the nearby structure. NIST states that the, quote, normal office fires were the main reason for the collapse, along with the lack of water for the firefighters to fight it. Fires burned all afternoon, especially on the lower floors. Separate fires in World Trade Center 7 broke out on different floors, most notably on floors 7 to 9 and 11 to 13. Firefighters reported large gashes and fires in the south face of the building, but NIST states in their final report that there was not much structural damage. NIST claims that Building 7 collapsed because heat expanded the floor beams and their unusual length magnified that effect. They also claim that connections between structural elements could not resist the effects of heat and that the structure was not designed to prevent fire-induced progressive collapse. The north side perimeter showed fires only on a few floors, but NIST claims that fires were more extensive on the south side, which was hit by burning debris. NIST states that a girder on floor 13 lost its connection to a critical column, column 79, that provided support for the long floor spans on the east side of the building. The displaced girder caused floor 13 to collapse. Floor failures cascaded to the 5th floor. This collapse weakened column 79 over 9 stories. Column 79 then buckled and triggered an upward progression of floor system failures that reached the building's east penthouse. NIST asserts that the failure first occurred from floor 12 and then to the top of the building. Then all of the columns east to west failed in the core of the building. Finally, the entire facade collapsed at a nearly symmetrical 6-degree tilt. This series of structural failures, mostly invisible, I should say, very important, with the east penthouses seen collapsing first, then around 7 seconds with nothing visible on the north face. As evidence of the complete collapse of the penthouse and the structure beneath during those 7 seconds, NIST shows this photograph of light shining through the windows right after the east penthouse disappeared from view. By visual observation, NIST acknowledges that the building's exterior facade fell at less than free fall acceleration for 1.5 seconds, then at approximately free fall acceleration for 2.25 seconds, through a distance of approximately 8 stories, which would be 32 meters or 105 feet. The entire facade collapsed downward as a single unit in 6.5 seconds. NIST also performed a computer analysis of what an explosive demolition might have looked like. These diagrams show NIST's speculation that many more broken windows, much louder sounds, and a different pattern of destruction would have been observed. Other scientists and institutions, each with their own expertise, has proposed variations on NIST's proposed causes and sequence of the collapse of the collapse of Building 7, including Arthur Sherman, Ryan Mackey, the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, the University of Edinburgh, and ARUP. Now, we're going to go right into our format that we had before, questions for each of our debaters. Again, the order these questions are derived in were come up with jointly by our two debaters. So then, first we're going to go to Richard Gage and his critique of the NIST explanation. Mr. Gage, that just sounded like a pretty reasonable explanation, which most people believe. Why don't you go along with it?
Here's the problem that I have with the NIST explanation. It's lacking the acknowledgement of all of the evidence for explosive controlled demolition found at the site from the eyewitness testimony and the debris pile and the chemical analysis, all of which are features of explosive controlled demolition. In this case, not as explosive as the Twin Towers, where everything blew outside the footprint. In this case, it's a perfect implosion, as quoted by FEMA. We have each of the features of explosive controlled demolition, so we're going to break this down into subjects. Fire can't account for any one of these features, let alone all 10 of them. So the question for you tonight is this proof of explosive controlled demolition? Let's start with explosive demolitions. We know how they behave because we have hundreds of examples from all across the country from which to draw our comparison. This is an explosive controlled demolition. We have a near freefall collapse caused by the destruction of the structural components inside the building, starting with the interior columns progressing outward, starting with the floor progressing upward, where the columns are taken out virtually simultaneously. This produces a symmetrical collapse at near freefall acceleration because we've removed that resistance. So, we know an explosive controlled demolition when we see one. The question for you is this an explosive controlled demolition?
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
Let's take another look. East penthouse first,
Richard, that's
second before, and the rest of it comes down at near free fall symmetrically.
It's gone, man.
Now to Chris Mohr for his rebuttal.
Well, first of all, so many people, when I express my skepticism about the controlled demolition, say, what about Building 7? And we're finally talking about it. I didn't talk about it in my first debate, so I'm glad to be doing it here. Scientific debate has been raging about Building 7. I shouldn't say raging, that's an exaggeration. But the structural engineers and physicists who have studied this is, by the way, not a scientific debate. I'm not a scientist. I'm coming at this as a journalistic person. Richard has a lot more training than I do, but neither of us really has all the training we need to do the hard science on this. These computer simulations that NIST did are way more advanced than were available in the 60s or 70s or 80s or 90s. In fact, even in the year 2001, these kinds of simulations were not available as part of the technology of the time. There are 6 different natural collapse theories that I've seen so far. Some of them talk about not only do the steel beams expand more, but then after they cool off when the fire moves somewhere else, they sag and then they contract, and the contracted sagging steel brings things back together even more for more of the inward bowing there. So that pulls in on the exterior supports even more.